Welcome to episode 16 of the Backseat Fighter Podcast. I'm so excited to be back in the real studio. It's been a while, but UFC Vegas 101, the main event between Dern versus Ribas, went down last night. The rematch, Dern comes out on top, and we're going to get straight into that main event and react to all of the big fights on the card. But before we get into the episode, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone on the views and the support on the most recent content, especially the short form clips. But 94% of you are not subscribed, man. What are we doing? Subscribe, join the family. And I'm just happy to grow this community and grow MMA media more healthily than ever before. Thank you so much for watching. Let's get straight back to the episode. But let's get into that main event. As I said, my goodness, Mackenzie Dern looked back to her best. And I did a bunch of research and analysis trying to predict this fight and trying to really give you guys what I think you deserve, which is somebody who's going to take the time to go into analysis, watch all the fights back and come out with a conclusion. Now, I'm not always right. Don't get me wrong. I got some predictions on this fight card wrong. But with this main event, we saw exactly what I thought would happen. And that is Mackenzie Dern under the influence of Jason Parillo, really esteemed coach, especially in the striking. She looked so much more confident in that department. Comes out, putting the pressure on, using that polished up 1-2 that I spoke about. And it looked really good coming out the start. And now in that first round, Amanda Ribas also has success pushing Mackenzie Dern back. And we saw maybe a remnant of those old habits of, sticking her arms out, leaving her chin up high in the air. And that did worry me a little bit whilst I was watching the fight. But as you saw, as the fight developed, Mackenzie still looked more comfortable, more mentally locked in and precise. And, for me, it was amazing to see somebody like Mackenzie who was an underdog coming into this main event, back into a rematch, able to equal up the score, but also perform in such a mature manner and really listen to her coaches and trust her corner advice there. Again, they have such a good relationship when she goes back to the corner between rounds. And eventually, as you see, Amanda Ribas able to, I believe, tie it up, has a really good round. Mackenzie stays locked in and gets that third round submission with 10 seconds left in the round, sets up the armbar beautifully, fights the arms, and is able to lock it in. And you see Amanda Ribas, as soon as Mackenzie leaned back, pushed the hips up towards the elbow, looked like she was going to break that arm. Amanda Ribas tapped, and that was the crowning moment for her. But let me talk about Amanda Ribas for a second. Although she lost this fight, she looked great as well. She looks much better at 115 pounds at this straw weight class. Very twitchy again, as I said, in the hips, great feints, so composed in there, good striking, a really well-rounded fighter. And this isn't a black mark on her resume. Mackenzie Dern is definitely a future title contender, in my opinion, already has that star power. But Amanda Ribas, she just got overwhelmed by, at this point, Mackenzie Dern had more opportunities in this fight because she could take you down, and which she did very well in this fight. Mackenzie, as I said, in that Lupe Godinez fight, had really returned to that ability to get people down to the ground. Great takedowns. And once Mackenzie knew that she could take Amanda Ribas down, was comfortable, obviously, as always, off her back, and was holding her own on the feet, I just think it was a perfect concoction for Mackenzie Dern to come out and win this fight very convincingly in the end. And I'm just so happy for Mackenzie Dern. She actually, I don't know if I mentioned, she actually liked my reel and the post that I had made before the fight, the day before, where I said Mackenzie's going to win the fight, here's why. And the first person to like the post was Mackenzie Dern herself. So that just kind of shows the confidence that she was holding within her the day before the fight. Liking a podcast like mine right now, and just, liking that and saying, I'm coming, and I don't know, just enough confidence to literally say, I'll like this post and I'm going to win this fight. I thought it was incredible from her. And to be honest with you, I think the everything goes up from here for Mackenzie Dern. She looked great. She looked like she's really piecing it together. As long as she can stay, active, stay in the gym, stay with Parillo, and it looks like she's in a much better place just from an outside point of view. But that's hard to kind of say as somebody obviously is not in camp or around her often. But it was just a great performance and a great fight that topped off an amazing fight card. Let me know what you guys think. Did you predict Mackenzie Dern to win? And do you think, what's next for Mackenzie Dern? What's next for her in that division? Do you think she's going to be a future champ? And, what was your reactions to the fight? But let me know down in the comments. I really want to get you guys involved. But let's now move in to the co-main event of the evening. Now, this was one where I actually put a lot of time into the research into this one as well, looking back at their fights. I knew that Carlson Harris had come off a knockout loss. I knew that Santiago Ponzinibbio also had come off a 2-fight loss streak, one of those being a knockout to Kevin Holland, one of those being a very close fight with Muslim Salakov. And, I really thought this fight was up for grabs. I ended up predicting Carlson Harris, and this was a back and forth one. Obviously, Carlson Harris is really winning the exchange on the feet in the first round, wobbles Santiago Ponzinibbio a couple of times with that really good jab, and he has a very clubbing, kind of looping right hand that you would think would be relatively ineffective, but somehow it always lands on people and causes people problems. And for Carlson Harris to come out like that, I really thought, he might take this fight. But the experience, as I said it would do in my predictions, it always plays a role at this level. And a guy like Ponzinibbio, who I think has, closing in on 40 professional fights in MMA. So this is a guy who's approaching his 40s and, almost has 40 fights in the sport. He wasn't going to get deterred. He wasn't going to quit on himself and just use that experience, use that composure to then start changing the fight, landing his jab, putting that pressure, closing the distance, able to land some really big shots. And eventually Santiago Ponzinibbio throws the 1-2, the right hand cracks Carlson Harris's chin. And eventually what you see is Carlson Harris get wobbled. He follows it up. Santiago Ponzinibbio starts following up, cracking him again. Carlson Harris super wobbled up against the fence, and eventually the ref jumps in. Now, the referee didn't do a great job in my opinion, because if he was going to stop the fight, he should have stopped it before Carlson Harris kind of gained some of his wits about him and was throwing back. And, usually you don't see that. You don't see a referee jump in when a fighter is intelligently defending himself. Now, was Carlson Harris severely hurt and concussed? Yes. So for fighter safety wise, you can't really argue it in that sense. But on the rule book, what should the ref actually do according to the rule of the sport? He shouldn't have jumped in at that point. If you want to say when he gets dropped, when Carlson Harris gets dropped by the Santiago Ponzinibbio, a big shot, and you want to say, okay, that's when the ref should jump in, fully agree with you. But for it to go a couple of seconds extra and then Carlson Harris to start throwing back, land a check left hook, Santiago Ponzinibbio is entering range, I don't think the referee should have stepped in there. But for Santiago Ponzinibbio, he says he wants to be active this year, 3 to 4 fights. And at his age, I don't know if that's necessarily sustainable, but I do think it's a big goal. And you see, he's still not, he can still fight with the best guys in the world and still got that killer mentality to not give up after getting really rocked and hurt in a couple of the rounds there. To come back and land such big shots was truly spectacular, and a testament to kind of these older guys in the UFC and kind of how our veterans in the UFC really shows the elite level. And that's relevant to another fight on the main card, the Christian Rodriguez versus Bashi fight, which we'll get into. But obviously for Carlson Harris, this is a big blow. This is a guy who has had some success in the UFC, obviously against Jeremiah Wells, against Impa Kasanganay, are the two big fights that I thought about in my prediction. Obviously has knockout power, but that's a third loss, I believe, in the UFC. He obviously has one to Shavkat, where he got wheel kicked and finished. Has one against Chaos Williams, where he unfortunately got knocked out. And again here by Santiago Ponzinibbio. So for his team, I hope they, think about the best for their fighter, what's next for him. And I'm sure he'll be back in the octagon soon, because he's an entertaining fighter, always puts on a good show. Somebody's going down and getting finished. But yeah, I really like him. He's such a polite guy, such a wholesome guy. Even after getting knocked out, he's, interviewing in the post-fight with Ponzinibbio, saying, really great job and all this stuff. He's from Guyana, trained out Rio de Janeiro. And it was just a great fight to see for the fans. And, sometimes a lot of us as fans and journalists probably say, these Apex cards and the name value kind of sometimes suffers, right, in recent times. But this was a great co-main event, and, it followed on from a really, really good fight before that, which we'll get into right now, which was Cesar Almeida versus Abdul Razak Alhassan. Now, you can go look at the podcast I did for predicting this. I said that I just spent a lot of time talking about Cesar Almeida striking. For me, he's one of the top 5 strikers in the UFC, and I was just raving about him, about his techniques. I went through some screenshots about how he rolls with punches and counters straight off of the roll, and I just thought he was too elite in terms of the striking to lose this fight on the feet. But he almost did, because Abdul Razak Alhassan, as we know, is athletic, he's got power, he's ruthless, especially up against the fence. He can, as I said in my predictions, he throws elbows, he throws hooks off the exit, and especially at the end of the rounds, if he has you hurt, what he'll do, and we saw it against, I think it was against Claudio Ribeiro, but please correct me on that if I'm wrong. Abdul Razak Alhassan up against the cage, he exits the clinch, just throws 10 punches to end the round. Maybe Cesar Almeida's team, his coaches saw that beforehand and said, okay, if he gets us against the cage, throw a counter in the middle of that flurry that he likes to throw up against the cage. But you see Abdul Razak Alhassan drop Almeida in the first round. My mouth dropped. I couldn't believe it. I was worried. for Cesar Almeida. But then in the middle of that flurry that Alhassan likes to do, you see Cesar Almeida, land the biggest knockout I've seen in a long time. Just a one shot, I believe it was a left hook, one shot knockout. Abdulrazak Alhassan is out before he hits the floor. The back of his head hits the canvas. I believe he didn't move for about 5 minutes or wake up for about 5 minutes. Wasn't really coherent when he got put on the stool by his team and the doctors and all the medical staff. So for me, that is probably an early fight of the year contender and one of the most ruthless, vicious knockouts I've seen in a long time. Praying for Abdulrazak Alhassan. I'm sure he hasn't seen my message, but I really wanted him to get him on the podcast beforehand. I just sent him a message over Instagram saying, head up, man. Like, he's a warrior. Nobody could do what he can do. And hopefully he recovers, just spends time with his family and friends and decides what's next for his career. But Cesar Almeida, oh my goodness. He reminds me so much of Alex Pereira. I said that to my friend. You can ask him. I don't know if I said that in the podcast. I think I did actually on episode 15. But he reminds me so much of that striking style where it's just ruthless, it's clean, it's precise, it's accurate, and so intelligent because he's able to roll with the shots, block shots so well, never really take shots clean, apart from that one that he got dropped by. But to be so comfortable after being dropped, after being dazed, after being, struck and concussed, to then be in the middle of that pocket, the wherewithal to throw that left hook, ruthless power, and put somebody out cold like that, for me, it makes him such a contender in that middleweight division. And he can fight out of both stances, so fluid, got the power, as you can see. And for me, he's one of my favorite fights in the UFC, literally. And he wasn't, I'm not going to admit, he wasn't somebody that I held in such high esteem before researching for the fight night, because I went through and watched a bunch of his fights and I was like, this guy is unbelievable on the feet, unbelievable. And to see him get a win like that was just absolutely immense. I'm sure he's so happy with that. But, he's got to also work on not getting dropped. I think he's been dropped by Kopylov and by Abdulrazak Alhassan inside the UFC. So, he's also got to work on some things defensively, but he doesn't usually take shots clean. So I'm going to give him, I'm just going to give him, his praise, his flowers, because that was one of the best knockouts I've seen in a very, very long time, and super happy for him and his team. And what a comeback win in itself. But for me, Cesar Almeida, star of the show, fight of the year or knockout of the year contender already. And I don't know what else I can say about that, to be honest. I'm just, that was insane. I was screaming. I was like, oh my goodness. I sent a message to CC Legaspi, Carlos Contreras Legaspi, who works at ESPN, MMA, ESPN Deportes, covering the UFC. And I was like, wow, what a knockout. This is insane. And he actually weighed in. He said, you can't, when Abdulrazak was throwing the flurry, you can't just throw double hooks without, covering up. You're always going to leave that space and risk getting knocked out. But, great insight from him. Shout out to him. And what an absolute beast of a knockout. One of my favorite fights in the UFC, top 5 striker in the UFC, in my opinion. You guys let me know what you think. But now let me move into the war of the card, probably the fight of the night, in my opinion. Chris Curtis versus Roman Kopylov. Now, this was a fight that I literally couldn't predict in my predictions episode. I didn't know what to say. I went through analysis on how I thought Kopylov would win. I went through my analysis of why I thought Chris Curtis would win, thinking that in the middle of the episode, I'd be able to come up with an answer, and I couldn't. And, that was justified because these guys went back and forth. I thought it was tied up 1-1 going into the third after an amazing performance, amazing first round by Kopylov, able to hurt Chris Curtis a couple times and, really throw an amazing one too. He's so accurate. When he decides to sit down in his punches, it hurts people badly. This guy's an absolute finisher in the ring, in the octagon, in the cage. But Chris Curtis, as I said in my predictions, he's a fighter's fighter. He's tough as nails. He's got great pressure, good boxing, good uppercuts, really good body work, probably the best in the UFC in terms of the hands to the body. And I just, I knew that Chris Curtis was going to keep coming, and I was very intrigued to see how this fight would have played out. And considering Kopylov's questionable cardio. Now, I'm a guy sitting in this room in a box in New York City, talking about, he's in the middle of a war, his cardio's not great, right? So I get it. I can't really stand on a pedestal and be like, I'm a insane cardio freak. Like, I'm not going to get in there and do that, am I? So I don't want to go too hard on Kopylov's cardio, because there's something that we can never do, is be in a war with Chris Curtis. But, it was questionable. Like, Chris Curtis's style is so heavy pressure, so pushing forward, so tiring on his opponents because they're moving back the entire time, that I was questioning whether Kopylov would run out of steam. But then, as you see, Chris Curtis just absolutely digs to the body work and gets the second round, in my opinion. I know some people still had it 2-0. And then that third round, Kopylov's eyes split open completely here. by the eyebrow. I'm not going to put a screenshot because I'll get destroyed by YouTube. But, you know, it's bleeding all over his face. And Chris Curtis staying in that southpaw, that Philly shell, flicking out the jab, targeting that cut. Really good tactics from him. But Kopylov, even though he was tied, every time he sat down, bang, bang, would throw that 1-2 and really connect on Chris Curtis, and it would hurt. And you'd see Chris Curtis, you know, get sunned for a little bit, but in that typical tough, extreme couture, Chris Curtis, the action, man, fashion, he keeps pushing forward, doesn't stop. And, you know, it was a brilliant performance by Chris Curtis. But then towards the end, the fight's still up for debate. Who's winning? Kopylov lands an absolute beam of a head kick, which does wobble Chris Curtis. It drops him. And Kopylov kind of walks away, you know, across the octagon away from where Chris Curtis has been dropped. The ref just steps in and ends it, even though there's 1 second left in the fight. Now, for me, that's a controversial ending. Kopylov walked away. There was no danger, and there's 1 second left in the fight. Let Chris Curtis go to the judge's decision. Don't let him. You know, there was no reason, in my opinion, that the referee had to call an ending to that fight and wave it off. Because for me, Kopylov wasn't presenting any danger, and I get it for the ref. He doesn't know where Kopylov necessarily is. He's just focused on Chris Curtis, right? So he doesn't know if Kopylov is coming back in to whack him a couple more times. I understand that. Fighter health, don't get me wrong. But obviously, from hindsight, bird's eye view, you could say he should have let it just finish out normally. But let me talk about that. Kopylov said, you know, in his post-fight interview, I believe, with Michael Bisping, you know, I knew he was hurt, and I didn't want to, he has a family, he's a family guy. I didn't want to hurt him any more than I already had. So really respectful from Roman Kopylov. I think they have immense respect for each other. And you know, this is one of those fights that just presents the amazing qualities that Chris Curtis has as a fighter. He's so difficult to beat. And unfortunately, that is another loss for him. Now, it sucks because he had gone through so much, right? He said he had torn his hamstring. I believe he tore his calf, and there was another issue that he mentioned in his Instagram post afterwards that I can't remember. But he's gone through so much in this, you know, lead up back to getting in the octagon, and for the result to go that way is a bit unfortunate, especially after what I would consider not a robbery, but you know, I believed that Chris Curtis did enough to get the scorecards on that fight against Brendan Allen. But Brendan Allen's such a beast as well. Brendan Allen deserved a win as well. So you know, I can't really speak about that too much. But what I will say is, you know, both these guys put on a war. They both hopefully got a 50K bonus. I don't know about the bonuses. I'm a terrible podcaster. So I don't know who actually got the bonuses, but they definitely deserved one. If they didn't, that is an absolute travesty. But you know, honestly, fight of the night, I thought Chris Curtis probably would have. You know, it went exactly how I went. I didn't know how I was going to predict that fight. You know, Kopylov is so technical, so powerful, such great finishing ability. But Chris Curtis is so durable, so much pressure, able to fight towards the end of a fight. And, you know, to be honest with you, if maybe Chris Curtis didn't have all of those injuries, and maybe if he had more time to fully train healthily, and maybe if it was a 5-round fight, the result is different. And I think for Kopylov, it's interesting now, right? Who does he fight next? What next elite middleweight does he go up against? And how does that look? Because if it's in a 5-round main event, I wouldn't say he's necessarily ready for that in terms of fighting, you know, a top 15, top 10 guy, because he gets tired. But is he able to do that? Of course. I think he can beat a lot of guys in this division. I just think there's some questions now that it's exciting for him probably to prove the question wrong. I've got cardio. I can beat these top elite guys. And it's exciting for the fans, right? We want to see someone like Kopylov, who's a finishing master, like who can just absolutely can eliminate you from the octagon. We want to see him in big fights. But that was an amazing fight. So shout out to both of those guys. Really put on a show. C-Rod, Christian Rodriguez versus Austin Bashi. Now, this is one for some reason, like I literally said it in my last podcast episode. I was like, no, I'm picking Bashi, but C-Rod is just the hype train killer, kills all the up and coming stars, you know, stops that hype train. And he did it again. My goodness, he did it again. Christian Rodriguez able to get the decision win over Austin Bashi after Austin Bashi's debut in the UFC. And it's like the UFC know, like if we've got an up and coming prospect, if they can beat C-Rod, they're the most legit. Like they're a star, because C-Rod he stops it every single time. I think he's 4-0 against guys making their debut in the UFC. So, you know, big names now on his record. And he showed a really great ability to not only obviously on the feet, really, really calm. I think at one point he like lands a big shot and then he's kind of like psyching out Bashi. He's like stomping and just so calm and composed, able to throw, you know, spinning elbows and high kicks and go to the body and work the head. And then even when Austin Bashi was able to get him down, He was transitioning really well, was floating with the takedown, sprawling and able to reverse positions. And then even on the feet, right, he's throwing knees to the body, he's throwing knees to the head, piecing up. Austin Bashi was bleeding at that point, and at the end of that fight, Austin Bashi's takedowns were becoming relatively ineffective. C-Rod had tired him out. C-Rod still looked relatively fresh as well. So that was a veteran's performance, and that's what I want to say when I'm talking about, like Ponzinibbio as well. If you're a veteran in the UFC, you've been there for a while, it's just a different level for these guys who are coming in and making a debut. Yes, Austin Bashi has a very good elite record in terms of his amateur days, winning in the Dana White Contender Series, Muay Thai champ, Jiu-Jitsu champ, and 13-0 prior to this fight. Don't get me wrong, but when you enter these big leagues, it just shows you the level of somebody like Christian Rodriguez, of the UFC as a whole, best fighters in the world. And for C-Rod to come out and pretty much unanimously, in terms of who I was watching it with on Twitter and the judges, obviously the most important three people to decide the result, everybody agreed that C-Rod had won that fight. So amazing for him, and I'm really, really happy. For Austin Bashi, this is not a big deal in terms of, no, he's not going to be a good fighter. He's going to be a very, very good fighter. He's going to be a guy who one day is up there challenging for the rankings and possibly even further, because he's just got the skill set to do so. He's got, great physical ability, of course, already. He's relentless. His mentality's there. It's just that C-Rod was able to do some damage on the feet and compete with him on the ground enough so that by the third round, he was tired and wasn't able to win that last one. So Austin Bashi still got incredible potential. And yeah, I don't see this as the end of the road for him. And, sometimes MMA fans are so fickle that they'll probably start being in Austin Bashi's comments. And I've heard that from, people like the Professor Xavier Vines, who I spoke to, Tuco Tokos. I'm sure that every fighter, unfortunately, has to deal with trolls and people, questioning them. But I don't think there's any road for Austin Bashi. But C-Rod, he looked good right now at featherweight. He looked big and strong. And he looked like he had a lot of energy because he's probably eating more in training camp. He's probably not having to cut as much in the sauna, in the water cut before the fight. So he looked really healthy and happy at that weight class. So what's next for him? I have no idea. Featherweight is an absolute demon of a weight class. But let me move now to the fight that opened up the main card. This is a fight that I predicted with, certainty. So I don't get them all right, and that's not what this podcast is all about. It's about, really with humility and honesty, treating this sport with the time it deserves, the time dedication it deserves, because these guys are not just playing for a result on the record. They're risking everything to be in here. But Punahele Soriano defeats Uros Medic by knockout in the first round. Uros Medic is the stand-up beast. He's a guy that slip back uppercut. Oh my goodness, he landed on Tim Means. I really thought he would have the big advantage, and he probably did have the big advantage on the feet, and Soriano would go to wrestle, go to grapple, and that was just how this fight was going to play out, and we would see who was going to win. But at welterweight, Punahele Soriano looks strong, he looks fast, he looks fine, he looks good, and Uros Medic comes in, and they're kind of exchanging on the feet, but he exits, as Dominic Cruz pointed out on the broadcast, he exits straight back in the straight line instead of rotating or circling out. Soriano catches him, and it's all said and done. A great performance by Punahele Soriano, and I was so high on Uros Medic, and I still am. Don't get me wrong. This is not the end of the road for Medic either. Medic for me is such an exciting fighter, and he's always gonna either finish his opponent or get finished. He still hasn't been to a decision in his entire career. Punahele Soriano was emotional in the post-fight interview after his victorious performance. He was crying a bit on the post-fight interview. I think he recently had a baby with his wife, so people don't think about that aspect of this, right? You've got a baby on the way. There's a lot of pressure on you to not only show up for the fight, right, not get injured, but also you've got to get that win bonus as well because you got a family to start. So amazing performance by Punahele Soriano, and so happy for him. Uros Medic, I believe he can build back. It was a bad knockout. He got clipped and jumped on and landed with some more punches afterwards, but he looked in pretty decent spirits after it. But look at this. What a card. Like, submission in the main event, KO, a beautiful right hand, TKO in the co-main event. Cesar Almeida, probably one of the best knockouts I've ever seen. Kopylov, last minute of the fight, head kick knockout of Chris Curtis. C-Rod, goes toe-to-toe with the new up-and-coming prospect. And then Punahele Soriano clips the kickboxer, clips the guy that he's not supposed to beat, not supposed to win on the feet against. And, what a great fight. I know. I unfortunately was on the plane coming back from London to New York, so I wasn't able to watch the prelims, which was a shame, real big shame. JFK, sort out the bloody immigration at your airport, please. I'm waiting 3 hours every time to get into this country because you have nobody. Like, what is going on? Why is there nobody working the border for the foreigners, man? But I did see, I think I managed to catch the Jose Johnson versus Felipe Bunez fight. And that was also one where Jose Johnson came out in that first round, looked incredible, looked good. It was not piecing, but, looked very, very sharp on the feet at 6 foot at flyweight. It's absolutely crazy. I do believe he missed weight, but Felipe Bunez gets the submission. I believe it was an arm bar in the end. And wow, what a great card. Absolutely fantastic. Anything else to know? I saw Potieria just the finish, get knocked out by Marco Tulio. And there's one more that I saw that I don't remember right now. Is it down on the card? I'm looking on the fight card right now. I think it was Jacob Smith versus Preston Parsons. I've seen that going around. Absolute beast of a knockout. It was a cross to the lead left hook that absolutely ended Preston Parsons, and he's 10-0 now in the UFC. So absolutely amazing fight card. I just wanted to get here and instantly react to this and try and upload it here on the Sunday for you guys to see what I felt. And listen, so happy for Mackenzie Dern. She liked the post, so she's a legend. And I've got some exciting things planned for this podcast, man. And what a great card to start off the year. Super excited that my analysis, it took me a long time to go through all those fights and make my research and notes. And I'm just happy that the fights were so exciting, man. So good. But yeah, I think it's gonna be a good year for the UFC, man. Really, really, really good year. But let me get into a quick discussion really quick to end off this episode. And then I'll see you next time. All right, so I was going to do a discussion on the standard of refereeing, but that will be in the next episode. I got one of the funniest comments I've ever seen on one of my posts, which I'll shout that person out in the next episode. But I wanted to shout out another comment that's going to lead this discussion point today. And we've been talking about it in the last couple of episodes, so I want to continue. And it's about revolutionizing combat sports by implementing academies and making it more of an institutional system that can actually process up-and-coming fighters, that can give them gear, that can pay for their training. That means that fighters don't have to be working second jobs all the way up until they're literally champion of the UFC. And it's a comment by a guy called Mike Warwick 3 on TikTok. And it was on my post saying how to revolutionize combat sports. He says, until MMA unionizes and starts getting a percentage of the profits like other sports leagues, no one should get involved in MMA. The risk versus reward makes no sense. Now, that's a very intelligent comment to make. And it's the type of dialogue that I love and want on this community in my space, whether it's on my TikTok, whether it's on the YouTube, whether it's on Instagram or on Spotify. Like, that's exactly what I want to be hearing from my viewers. And Mike Warwick, incredible point. And this, I'm going to explore it a little bit. I completely understand where he's coming from because nobody can compete with the UFC, right? You see other leagues like PFL basically aren't able to either book fights for their fights because they can't pay them, or they're, it's low quality and it's all a mess, right? In other promotions, Bellator went under. You see that people like the you see other promotions, just struggling to pay their fighters, and fighters can't get fights in other promotions, and the UFC has created a dominance in this space. Now, is that because they put on the best shows? Yes. Is it because they have the best fighters? Yes. Is it because historically they've always made the fight the fans want? Yes. Right? But we're now getting to a point where it comes with streaming services and pay-per-views and monopolizing the market, where it's very, very difficult for any other promotions and fighters outside of the UFC to make enough money, right? And for Mike Warwick to say here that he doesn't believe that people should get involved in MMA, that's fair enough. If you're a businessman right now, I wouldn't say let's start a promotion, right? Because it's very hard to make it profitable. And a lot of the times, Dana White defends his business model. And when people question his fight to pay model, question the pay-per-views, question why he does this, or X, Y, and Z, he says, well, look at other guys. Who else is able to succeed in this space? Now, the different question that he raises there is that the fighters need to unionize. Well, that's a huge statement, and I agree, but I don't necessarily know how that process takes place or how that can happen. it would require all of the fighters to come together and decide it's the right thing to do, which I think is very hard in a sport like MMA because it's so individualized, right? It's the fighters on their own making money. And it's a lot more on fighters to promote themselves than it is for teams in the NBA or teams in football or teams in the NFL to promote as a team, right? And you just don't have that that media machine, that marketing machine behind you as a fighter that you would do in other sports. So it'd be such a good idea for the fighters to unionize in so far as they're able to get things like, pensions for after they're retired, medical fees and services after they're done fighting, and, just more things like that that can really help them. Will that happen with the UFC? I don't know, because I don't know the processes, the ins and out of the business on the back end, right? On behind the scenes. I'm not in the office of the UFC. I'm not in, how the athletic commissions run things when it comes to things like that. But MMA, for the fighter's sake, might need to unionize, because what you're getting right now is fighters who are making a bunch of money at the very top of the sport. You've got the Israel Adesanya, who's the Jorge Masvidal's, Conor McGregor's, who else is probably out there? Alex Pereira, John Jones. I'm thinking of guys, there's probably way more that I can mention right now. That a lot of it's just on the lower end of things, right? A lot of the guys are getting paid 10 grand to fight, which just isn't enough if people want to have a second job. But let me know what you guys think. I think that's such a good point by Mike Warwick3 on TikTok. And I'd love for him to expand more. But yeah, this is such a good point. Like, how can we make steps for it? How can we make it easier for fighters to make money and be a professional fighter alone and not have second jobs? Do they just unionize, or is the current model okay, but they just need to increase minimum fighter pay? Or does it require a much bigger systemic change where somebody else, not the UFC, needs to come into this space? For me, I think it's one of those things that can be changed within the UFC and maybe eventually will, but I don't know. The UFC, I'm such a big fan, and we're also used to those big three letters and fighters fighting under this name that we kind of have an affinity and a love for it. But that doesn't mean there aren't things that can't improve in this space. And as Bobby said, right, and we spoke about in that podcast where this whole discussion started, episode 14 of the Backseat Fighter, MMA is so young. It's in the first 30 to 40 years of its life cycle. This is probably what a lot of other sports were like from the beginning. And we're going to have to go through these growing pains in order to reach the stability, the structure that a lot of other sports have. Now, you guys know how I feel about fighters. I think they're the most special athletes on the planet because they're more than athletes, right? They're absolute warriors putting it all on the line every single time they go out there. And the fact that they're not getting paid, a livable amount of money from fighting is a bit ridiculous. There needs to be a way of making fighting and making a living from fighting more accessible and easier for people who put so much and sacrifice so much for doing the sport they love. But I hope we can talk about that more. Mike Warwick3, if you're watching, really thank you for the comment, and let's keep talking about this. How can MMA unionize? Do the fighters need to come together? Do they need to boycott the UFC? I mean, what would happen? Like, how would that even look? How would that even take place? Let me know what you guys think. And are we going to see like a lockout? Are we going to see a collective, like a fighters union, like that always is in constant debates with the brass at the UFC over collective bargaining agreements, television rights, how much money they make, do they split the pay-per-views 50-50? How does it all go, right? It's super exciting to think about. Just really interesting. Absolutely love the UFC. What a card to start off the year. And I'll see you on episode 16. Episode 17. This is episode 17 of the Backseat Fighter Podcast. Subscribe. Thanks to you for listening. Follow me on all platforms. Let's keep this discussion going. We're getting there. Let's go. All right. See you later. I've been Charlie. Bye-bye.